You're going to get it right some of the time, and you're probably going to get it wrong an equal amount, sometimes even more. You may get it wrong. That's happened to me. And I think every one of those situations, I've learned something that helps inform the next decision that I make. And that's the CEO's opportunity in elevating emergent leader talent, is you're learning about your organization and you're learning about you as a leader.
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, where lifelong learning takes center stage. This is a show for leaders who have an insatiable appetite for growth and the courage to get out of their comfort zone and help redefine what leadership should look like for generations to come. I'm your host, Damon Lembi, 3-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million individuals. Joining me in a moment is Brian Turner, a Vistage Chair and former president and CEO of Point B. Over Brian's 30-year career, he's held key leadership roles at Point B and beyond and has helped guide leaders across multiple industries. And I'm super excited to sit down and discuss with him things like why mindset is a real predictor for leadership potential, how to avoid the blind spots that keep senior leaders from spotting emerging talent, and how bold talent bets can transform not just careers, but entire organizations.
So Brian, you spent your career helping leaders push the boundaries of what's possible. But what happens when you get somebody the opportunity and you trust them with something bigger than what they may even think they're comfortable with?
I love that question because this is the ultimate extreme sport of leadership. And here's the way I think about it. I have to tell you this story about RC. It was the first time that I did this where I put somebody in a position of leadership who may not have been fully ready for it. And so we have to go all the way back to 2000. And I tapped this person, RC, to run this major technology project out of probably a group of 200 that had been waiting in line for that opportunity. And so here's what happened and why I'm telling you this story, because it plays out time and time and time again. So the first thing that happens, I swear RC grew 6 inches. All of a sudden she's leading bigger, has a stronger voice, more opinions. All the people who are connected to RC, they all grow 3 inches because they're like, hey, that thing just happened to RC. And so it's not a function of tenure. It's a function of mindset and how good you are. Well, then I'll be honest, Damon, then the organizational antibodies kick in. And so all of the people who thought they were going to be selected for that, they all start raising obstacles, hey, is she really good enough? Why did he select her? And her bosses are also planting some seeds of doubt. Have you ever worked with that guy, Brian? He's super intense. Or what's going to happen if you can't figure it out? And that all kind of manifests itself into imposter syndrome. We all have it. But for RC, she was oh my God, what did I do? I may not be the person. But here's the cool part. This is the leadership moment. You get to reinforce with RC, here's why I selected you. Here's what I see in you. Here's what your potential is. You get to speak with clarity on here's what I expect, not only for RC, but for the organization. And then most importantly, you get to create the space for RC to learn. And you do those things and all of a sudden, crazy things happen. The morale goes up in your organization. And somebody like RC, I'll tell you, I had no real impact on RC's future. Other than that moment, she did become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company 2 decades later. And, well, I had a small part to play in that.
I mean, that's a great story, and I have so many questions. I had a similar situation like that with a woman on my team, Laurel Taylor, who worked for me for several years, came back. She was back in school at Google. She was going to go get a job somewhere else. And I said, why haven't you started your own thing? And she's like, you really think I could do it? And I said, absolutely, you could. And now she's raised $60 million and she runs a company called Candid, which crushes student debt. And I'm so happy that I played a small role in that. When it comes back to RC, where was she on the ladder for that? I mean, did you dig deep, and how did you decide to take a risk on her?
Yeah, if it was a punch list, she was probably like in 20 to 30 on that punch list. I mean, she was pretty far down the stack because she had no technology skills. And this was a technology project, but I had seen RC in action. And so what I was looking for was creativity, courage, the confidence to make adjustments when things were wrong, and the curiosity to learn along the way. And so, in that team, in that organization, I'm always looking at how talent is showing up, and I'm trying to, assess like mindset and courage and aptitude to try something new. And so, yeah, it was a total surprise to the organization. But like I said, like the dividends to her and to the organization of like, hey, tenure doesn't really matter. Mindset and adaptability and courage matters more. Like sent a very strong signal.
I like how you really framed it as looking for merit over, let's say, tenure or experience, and how great that is. I want to take it back a step. Tell us a little bit about your leadership journey.
Oh, it's been crazy. I mean, I probably had like a dozen jobs before the age of 21. Everything from ambulance driver to lifeguard to security guard. After 21, I really have only worked in 3 organizations. Accenture for 12 years, Point B for 22, and now with Vistage as a Vistage Chair. And for me, like I had people who made big bets on me. And that's probably why I'm pulling this through right now. I think about the founders of Point B, where I was CEO. I was probably number 30 on their depth chart, but they happened to know and see that I had testified before a state legislature on an IT project. And they were like, wow, he can carry his own. And like when the heat's up, his blood pressure goes down. Well, that gave me an opportunity to really elevate into a C-suite leadership role that ultimately prompted a series of other leadership jobs that helped me become CEO. And so I think about that a lot. If, what was the mindset of the person who took a big bet on me, and what did I do with the opportunity? Now, in my current profession, I get to instill in other CEOs, presidents, and owners that same bravado of like, how do I transform my organization? How do I elevate talent? And how do I grow my company? And so I look at my job right now as one of the coolest is I get to help leaders play big, like build the capacity to do really big things. And in my role as CEO coach with Vistage, that's kind of like my life's calling. So
at Point B, you stepped into a leadership role, I believe, in around the 2022?
Yeah. Well, I was president in 2018, right? So right before the craziness of the pandemic. But it was really that defining moment. Point B was transforming as a business that I moved into the CEO role in 2022.
And that was also when they took an investment with private equity. So there had to be a lot of changes throughout the organization during that time. So how did that period shape you even more as a leader? Well,
you think about like the intersection of business performance with human performance. And you go through a transition like that, and it really, you begin to see kind of where that intersection is. I think a lot of our lives as leaders, we're either one, focused on the financials, or two, focused on the human, depending on what hat we're wearing. Well, in that transition for Point B, those two things had to come together. New set of metrics, new set of growth expectations, and a traditionally rich culture. And so I had to find the intersection of that and move just not the business, but the hearts and minds to a different future state. And I learned so much, some of it good, some of it like hard lessons in life. But that's all part of the journey.
Can you share an example of one of those hard lessons in life?
Yeah, I had this moment when you're a CEO, you have this big moment of like the grand reveal of your vision and 5-year strategy. And so I had this August of my first year. This is going to be my big moment. And we got this big financial surprise that we were very significantly off plan. And it was a surprise, unfortunately, because we weren't really able to understand our business well enough. And so here is the life lesson of like, how do you both address the crisis of being financially off plan and still create space for your board and your organization to think about the future. And that was very difficult to do. And I can say like, I was able to pull it off, but it took an iteration or two, and it took a lot of listening and thinking about like, is this the moment where I can really lay down exactly what I want to do, or do I need to create space for this financial challenge? Or conversely, do I just get sucked into this financial challenge and I don't tell anybody why we're doing this? And so that was a really defining moment, because those things need to hang together ultimately.
And one thing, just from doing my research on you, I bet you took the approach of being transparent and sharing at least whatever was possible to share with the organization.
Yeah, I did a lot of that, almost to the point where I sometimes get feedback. I'd be like, hey, gang, let's go create magic in the world. And we're like, we're tired of magic. We want business results. I get it. But part of this is to try to really open the mind of like, okay, we got this crisis in front of us. Customer demand is shrinking, or the playing field is getting more competitive. What is it that we really want? And can we begin to think about like, what would the ideal state look like? And why do we do that? We're just trying to open the kind of the mental space, right? To think about like, how do I change things up on my assignment, my role, my client, the part of business I represent? And so that's, I think, a big part of leadership is, really trying to push the white space of like, hey, we got something sticky in front of us. Like, what's the optimum place we could be, and what doors could we go through that allow us to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as a CEO of a business much, much smaller. It's really easy to get stuck in the here and now, because you got to take care of the here and now, but you can't also lose that vision, and you want all the rest of your people to also be thinking what is possible these days. And taking it back to what you said, because this is so important around the future, is you shared with me that about 5 years ago, you found your purpose, or you're really focused on emerging talent. So my question is, what led you to that purpose? What was kind of the process you went through it, and how do you really define what emerging talent is?
Yeah, I'm left-handed, so I'm going to answer your questions in reverse. That's for those of us that the world works a different way. I'm going to answer your second question first. I think the opportunity that we have is to find leaders who are accelerating ahead of their experience level and ahead of their tenure. Like, that's what I would call emerging talent. People who are like earlier in their career that have the potential to, outperform their competition, because their mindset, their potential, and their performance is all tracking at a rate that is faster than the rest of the pack they're in. Now, for me, the passion really came from, I'm a person that believes in like organizational renewal and like trying to make sure that you have new mindsets, new voices to the table, because running a business can be kind of like an echo chamber. You end up developing trust with the same group of people. They have all kind of grown up with you, and so they know how to solve the same types of problems. And for me, that was never exciting enough. Like, I always felt like the cool thing is like the voices that you don't typically hear, and the imagination you don't typically tap into. And so that became like part of the passion behind the purpose. And then, I think of the other thing is just, I want my legacy to be like, hey, I helped 100 leaders, do some really big, amazing things. And so they can go on to run a Fortune 500 company or go solve a really big public policy problem. Like that moves the dial for me.
And so you touched on it a little bit. What are some of the blind spots or challenges that you see other senior leaders or CEOs experience when it comes to either attracting or identifying emerging talent?
I almost hate to say this, but as senior leaders, we're so far away from the action. Like, when's the last time that you as a CEO delivered value in the front line of your business? Like, when's the last time you went to the customer service department or were on the manufacturing line creating that product or dealt with an angry customer? And so you've got this distance problem, right? Of like, I'm running the company, I'm leveraged, I'm focused on the vision of the company, but your actual distance to the talent who's delivering value is now that much larger, right? And the challenge is that you're getting filtered information from the front lines of your business. But if you're there, you can observe directly, like who's doing what and who's adding value and who has the potential to do big things in the future. I think that's one big challenge. I think the second big challenge is I'm a big fan of HR systems and business systems in general, but they are designed to control and create predictability. And so whether it's your talent system, your financial management system, all of those things go to predictable, manageable, controllable businesses. And so that's a challenge because you're getting, what the systems, those systems are producing is like, hey, keep things steady and keep them predictable. But we know that transformational businesses are unpredictable. And so you've got to try to figure out how to lean into that. I think the other thing is you get stuck in your own head, right? Like you're hearing the same voices. You think about business problems the same way and you get comfortable with your peeps, right? Like the people you turn to help guide you in the decisions that you make. And we're all humans. It happens that way. But I think those are probably three of the biggest challenges. And maybe there's a little bit of like guilt in bucking the system. Like, hey, I've got the next 4 to 5 successors in place for this role, so I'm obligated to pick them. Well, you're not really obligated. You're just choosing to play it safe.
Yeah, I like how you've defined it as your 4P framework, really, right? So what are those 4 Ps again?
Proximity, paradigm, I'd say perspective and predictability.
And what happens, Brian, to a leader who is always turning to his or her, core network, either their core network or only looking for ideas from the highest paid person in the room with the title?
I think there's at least 2 big challenges. One is those high paid leaders, they're peddling influence. So they become more in the business of like, I don't want to tell Brian what I really think. I want to tell him what he thinks he wants to hear from me because I value the influence I have over Brian and I don't want to risk that. And so you get this kind of play it safe mentality, from those high paid leaders. I think the other thing that happens is you don't get a bird's eye view of like what's happening at the front lines of your business because things roll up and it's a little bit like the, what do they call it? The fish story. Like you catch a fish, you tell a friend, all of a sudden the fish is bigger you tell another friend the fish is even bigger. And by the time it gets to you, it's like a whale, but that's what happens in organizations is, you get filtered truth.
And so what advice do you have for leaders who to step out of that, to solve for that? How can they get, either closer to the talent or stop getting the filter truth?
At a practical level, one is to get out there where value gets created. And so can you carve out 20 to 25% of your week to spend with your customers or the delivery of your services and products? I mean, just don't live your life by going to internal meetings. Reconnect with what drives your business. I think the second thing is to make sure you are hearing different voices. For me, I had roughly about 900 employees at peak. I was using advisory councils all the time where I could bring in emerging talent and I could hear from them directly, like what's going on with you, like what are the development challenges, what are our delivery challenges. And so I was, changing the way information was flowing through the organization and into the organization by simply making sure I was hearing different voices. I think the third, just like the RC story, you got to mix it up. You always need to think about who could I be given the next opportunity to? And then lastly, you got to do a lot of storytelling because whatever you do in terms of deploying talent, you want the organization to know the story behind it. Well, why did he or she make that selection? What's the intent?
And when you were at point B, looking at some of the leaders, maybe some of your direct reports yourself, were you able to get them to open up their minds and start making risky talent decisions, kind of like how you led by example with RC? Yeah,
we would do these talent reviews, and I'm sure that if there's someone listening who is part of that journey with me, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I can remember this." I'd start drilling into them about people who are lower on their depth chart. Okay, so this person has high potential. What are you doing next week, next month to increase their scope of responsibility? Or you say you need to prove out this person needs to have more time in the seat, or they need to be able to perform this way in other client settings. Is that really true? Or are you just doing that because that's the comfortable answer? And so part of this is you pushing on the edge of what's comfortable with the leaders who are responsible for that talent. I think the second thing that you're doing is, you are, what would I say, supporting and creating skip level promotions as a tradition inside your organization. And I think that is important because you're trying to teach the organization that passion and merit have a place. I remember I had this person, in my prior job, LI, who was a strategist, right? And LI had all of the requisite skills to help us figure out where we needed to go, but she didn't have the platform. And so part of this was I remember this day, we had a leadership retreat and she was new to those leadership retreats. She's waiting for me in my office in front of the whiteboard with a marker in her hand. And she's I'm tired of this. We always have the same answers. And for the next hour, she schooled me. She was here's my platform for change for the organization. It makes my job easy. Now I just have to give her the platform to get that voice out in the organization. And that's a big part of this.
So in that situation right there, so she whiteboarded a bunch of ideas for change. Now I assume, you can't just try to implement all of those ideas, right? There's got to be some back and forth on that. But was there anything there that LI came up with that actually had a big impact on point B that you move forward with?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was using the data to actually make decisions. Like, we could see, based on market trends, the business was moving in a different direction. And that was uncomfortable to us because, like, we were just kind of in that primary, like, flywheel mode. And using the data, I think she really helped say, like, okay, gang, like, let's seriously look at what's happening in the marketplace over the next 5 years and how does it change the bets that we were making. And I feel like that was her biggest contribution, was we began changing our business based on that and what our customers were asking us to do. And I needed someone bold enough to put that out there, or else we would have just stuck with our primary flywheel, our primary knitting, so to speak. So,
and I think it's really important what you're talking about, that leaders of all levels need to stop protecting their comfort zone, because it's easy to be stable, protect your comfort zone, not have those difficult conversations, not make risky choices. But really, what I found they're doing is they're hurting their people. They're hurting the particular talent that they have, because they're putting themselves first instead of going out there and having those conversations. How do you create the type of space as a leader where somebody like LI feels comfortable enough? Because, I mean, let's be honest, Brian, it's pretty intimidating. You're the CEO of a 900-person, $200 million company to have those bold conversations.
I think you have to maybe think about, like, the 3 hats that you have to wear. Like, one of those hats, you have to be a really good, I'll call it the listening hat. Maybe think about, like, the Mickey Mouse hat with the ears. Like, your ears have to be big, right? In part, you need to listen to what the employee is going through and listen to the resistance that he or she might be getting. I think the second thing you need to do is you need to put I guess it'd be the learning hat on. You know, maybe that's like one of those graduation caps that we get to wear, right? And here it's to create the space for the employee to learn, because not everything is going to go swimmingly well. And for the organization to learn, like, here's what I, as a CEO, I'm looking for. And maybe that last hat is the hat of a storyteller. I don't know what hat that would look like, Damon. I guess that would be like, I don't know if storytellers wear hats, so maybe the metaphor doesn't work, but I think here you have to tell the story of what we're trying to do and why and what the expectation is. Because in part, you know, you've got a chain of command, and you've got to have the chain of command know that you're still reliant on them to execute, and that they are still empowered and they're still accountable for, like, driving the business day to day, and that you've elevated this person into an assignment or role to infuse new thinking. And the only way to do that, I think about this book from David Marquet, probably the biggest impact on me, called Turn the Ship Around. And thinking out loud was one of the big ideas, right? And so I just embraced that, you know, like, I'm going to be fully transparent with you of, like, here's what I'm doing and why, and here's the next action I'm going to take to make sure that the employee and the whole system, it's not left for interpretation. So it's being clear as crystal clear.
And also, I found, which is so true, is the importance of storytelling, because you could share ideas or you could share directions, but if you could connect those through stories, I think that's really what has the most impact with individuals, I found. Now, I've also heard a great story that maybe you could share, where as a leader, we open up for feedback, and you were challenged by an employee at one point, right? And how'd that conversation go?
That's part of it too. You know, the great part about running organizations is, like, you're on the clock all the time, right?
All the time.
We had this we were doing a series of employee town halls. And I'll never forget this because we had about like 30 people in the room for this conversation. And this employee who was relatively new, I think the employee had been there maybe a year and a half. We were talking about the importance of transparency as one of our values. And the employee raises their hand and says like, well, that's funny because I don't find that you're transparent at all. And so there's silence in the room, right? Like, oh my God. Yeah, like this person is calling out the CEO of being like not transparent. And like all the heads like whipped around. They're like, what's he going to do? And I was just like, tell me more about that. And the employee was like, well, you know, you said A and you did B. And we had a great conversation around that. It became like a 2-person dialogue in a room of 30 for like the next 5 minutes. But that became very important because I needed 2 things to get across to the other 29. Like 1, no question is off the table. And 2, every time we get like a hot response, our job is to lean into, well, tell me more about that so that we can really learn. And so that was a defining moment. And that went like viral through the organization because they're like, do you believe what just happened? You know, and he didn't get mad, you know, like he leaned into it. And those become really defining moments, I think.
I think it's a pivotal moment. But Brian, what was going on in your head? Because I'm sure there's listeners out there who are thinking to themselves how they would react to a situation like that. And I even know, maybe me personally, your reaction is maybe to get defensive, but what first went through your head? And then my follow-up question to that is, what's one piece of advice for the leaders out there on how to deflect or, let's say, handle that situation?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think the first thing that went through my head is, did I do something to this person? You know, like everyone has their own responses, but for me, I was just like, okay, did I do something to hurt this person? And it's just part of that reflection, right? And then I think the second thing I did is I just reminded myself to breathe a little bit. Like, okay, you know, I don't know if I hurt this person or not. And so I probably just needed to take a chill pill and just, all I had to think about was asking one open-ended question. Or in this case, it was just like, tell me more. And so I've been actually trained, you know, over time, like anytime I'm in a ambiguous situation or it's getting a little sticky, tell me more is a great way to just start a conversation. But I'd say that's a little bit like what was going through my head. And I think at a deeper, like subconscious level, you know, the story is not about you. Like, and I think that's the hardest thing, right? Is like you're running and leading a company. Our ego gets in the way sometimes. And we're like, hey, yeah, this is my company. This is my story. But the story really isn't about you. It's about the people that you're serving and the people that you're employing. And so if you can get yourself in that space of like deep curiosity, deep empathy, and kind of not looking at it as is it a reflection of you or not, you're in a much better place. And that's what I try to tell myself even now when I get into like a sticky conversation. It may not be about me, and it might just be time for me to learn.
I mean, when it comes to receiving feedback, which I believe is like one of the most important traits any leader, especially any senior leader, can have, because that's like the fuel for learning. And like you said earlier, we're always on stage. Everybody's always looking. So if you can learn how to receive feedback in that way, it opens up the door for people to give you feedback and to be more open to feedback themselves. But let's stick with curiosity for a second. What role does curiosity play in your success as in leadership?
Ask good questions, you get better answers. In some respects, you know, I feel like, you know, I think about like I have a sibling who my sibling thinks about the world very logically and deductively, right? Break problems down, solve the problem. I work the other way, and I think that's where curiosity becomes important. Is I like to try to understand a pattern and then figure out where does the pattern fit. And so leaning into that a little bit of like asking the why question, or, you know, what's driving that, or even like a tell me more statement kind of gets a layer deeper on what's really driving that issue. And it's going to give you good insight that then you can apply logic to, right? But a lot of times I heard this the other week, that correctly framing a problem is about like 60% of the solution. And I think like that's the opportunity to have more curiosity of like, do you know enough about the problem to make sure it's really the problem that needs to be solved, or is it something else?
So 60% of the problem is maybe framing it. Now, put you on the spot. Do you have any advice on how to get closer to that 60% for framing the problem?
Get a cross section of voices to the table. You know, it's a heart of what I did in my CEO journey. And it's the heart of what I do now with Vistage, is I try to get diversity in the room and a good cross section of talent to really pressure test, like, okay, what is this issue? Why is it important? Like, what has been done today? And ultimately, through context related questions, to really ferret out, is that really the problem, or is it something else? And I know, you know, in our work with Vistage, we actually will have our cohorts provide their advice at the very end, after we go through all of this exploration of like, is this really the right problem to solve? And it works because it really challenges the person, the leader, right, to make sure, yeah, this is the right problem. And they're listening before they start getting into recommendations to know, like, what are all the components of it? So,
yeah, I love it, because I was going to pivot into Vistage anyways. One of the things you mentioned earlier, which I think is so true, as a CEO, a lot of times it's very lonely up there. You don't really have the right people. You don't have anybody to turn to. You can't really, maybe not turn to your partner at home or a senior executive. So share a little bit more about the work you do at Vistage, and why do you think it's so critical for especially CEOs of all levels to either have mentors or join a group like Vistage?
Well, I think, you know, I kind of look at it this way, like, just like at Point B, I had an amazing board and I had a really great management team. But I'll also tell you, like, for me to perform well with my board and with my management team, I needed my peer group, you know, people who were not in the chain of accountability that I could just talk stuff through with. And I think like the relative importance of that is like getting perspective and also getting the challenge of like, what is my part of the problem? I also think about the great thing about cohort learning. You know, if you think about your life as a CEO, everybody wants something from you. You know, you go into any employee meeting, a customer meeting, a leadership meeting, a board meeting, somebody needs something from you. It could be an answer. It could be a direction. It could be a decision. You know, in Vistage or in a cohort like Vistage, this is the one time like you kind of get to step into a room without anybody needing anything from you. And then you can really put down like, hey, I don't know what to do about this issue. Like, what would you do? Or like, this thing really stinks and I'm hurting as a result of it. Like, what do you think? And I think that's kind of where the adaptive space for a leader becomes. Because if you don't have that, then you're only going to be as good as your ability to engage your board, your management team, and your organization in driving that change. And so that becomes important. Now, like for me, it just got old trying to talk to my Labrador retriever about the issues that I was facing. Like, he might wag his tail, he might bark, but I wasn't actually getting real-time feedback. So,
yeah, real-time feedback from peers who aren't always looking for something from you, which I think is so important. Now we're going to wrap up, and we've talked about a lot of great things. We talked about being a risk taker when it comes to talent, stretching people and looking at it from a merit perspective, not always for experience, and some of the blind spot that leaders have when it comes to talent. And I coined it your 4 Ps of why they struggle through that, and about curiosity as well, and the importance of being transparent and being able to receive feedback. What is one more piece of advice you have for senior level executives when it comes to sticking their neck out there for emerging talent?
It's your opportunity to learn too, right? I think as senior leaders, we need to be in the process of revising, like, what is the essence that we're looking for in the next generation of leaders? Because a lot of times we get focused on the content of these jobs, the skills needed to do these jobs, and not the personality, mindset, and presence that is needed to drive change. And so just like for the early career candidate, you're trying to create the space for learning, realize that you need to learn too. And you're going to get it right some of the time, and you're probably going to get it wrong an equal amount, sometimes even more. You may get it wrong. That's happened to me. And I think every one of those situations, I've learned something that helps inform the next decision that I make. And that's the CEO's opportunity in elevating emerging leader talent, is you're learning about your organization and you're learning about you as a leader.
So for the senior leaders, great piece of advice. It's a learning opportunity, for growth for you and for your organization. What is one piece of advice you have for the emerging leaders we've been speaking about?
Don't get sucked into imposter syndrome. If there's a question in your mind about, like, why you just got selected to do this thing, ask. And I would also, to be honest, I would think about thinking out loud is a very easy tactical way of, like, let everyone around you know what you're thinking. Okay, I'm going to do A, B, and C to solve this question. I am thinking about E, F, and G. And that becomes really powerful, because what you want is no secrets. You want, like, full transparency, and that's going to help you really elevate your game. And ultimately, all of the mindset and potential and presence that you have will come to shine. So that would be it.
I like the thinking out loud piece, because it kind of holds you accountable a little bit too, because you got it out there. It's out there for people to hear about. And when it comes to imposter syndrome, I really appreciate what you said earlier, that we all suffer from it. And the higher you go up in the ladder, I don't think it goes away. I think you still have your limiting beliefs and imposter syndrome. So that's so important. I'll put a link in the show notes. I talk a lot about a framework I use to overcoming imposter syndrome.
Awesome.
Brian, where can our listeners connect with you at?
Easiest way is to look me up on LinkedIn and book an appointment. The second easiest way is hit the Vistage website and find me there. But there is a conversation waiting for us. Just reach out.
And so I'll put those in the show notes as well for you, for your LinkedIn and your Vistage. And so for our listeners out there, I want to challenge you. If you're a leader, I want you to look into your organization, find a way to look into your organization and find somebody who's a high potential and give them a shot that's outside of their comfort zone, and just take that risk on them. Because like Brian and I have spoken about, they're going to be really grateful for it. And I bet they're going to exceed your expectations, and your whole organization will see that. And like you said, Brian, that individual will get 6 inches taller, and everybody else will get 3 inches taller.
Yeah.
And for you emerging leaders out there who deal with imposter syndrome, go for that shot. Don't worry about whether or not you're qualified. If Brian or somebody like Brian gives you that opportunity, that means you deserve that opportunity, and just go for it. So that's my challenge for everybody out there today. And until next time, do me a favor, as always, stay curious, keep learning, and have a great day. Thank you, Brian. I really enjoyed our conversation.
The 3 most dangerous words in any organization: not my job. If you say that, you are putting yourself in a box, you're putting a lid on it, and you're showing people